Thank you and welcome everyone. We're so happy to see such a large audience with us today for our topic, Effective Literacy Interventions. I'm Elizabeth Greniger. I'll be leading you through our presentation today, and our featured presenter is Dr. Janice Dole from the University of Utah. I'm going to give you a more formal introduction of Dr. Dole in just a moment, but before I do that, I'd like to find out who you all are and what roles you serve in. In just a moment, you'll see a poll come up on your screen, and we'd like you to select the role that best fits for your Great to see quite a few classroom teachers with us today. See some other school level administrators, quite a wide range of other folks. I think you'll find that today's topic lends itself well to those who are serving students more directly in the classroom and in maybe some peripheral roles at the school level, and then at even the research and policy level, there's a lot to learn, and Dr. Dole will kind of break down those different roles and how you can serve students well. Okay, so we're going to move right along. As I mentioned, today our featured presenter is Dr. Janice Dole. Dr. Dole is a professor of education in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Utah. After teaching for several years and receiving her master's and PhD, Dr. Dole held positions at Michigan State University, the Center for the Study of Reading, and at the University of Illinois and the University of Denver. She has published widely in the areas of comprehension and conceptual change learning, and more recently in professional development and school reform. Her publications include articles in journals such as Reading Research Quarterly, Review of Educational Research, the Elementary School Journal, and Reading and Writing Quarterly. She's also co-author of the book Adolescent Literacy, Research to Practice. Dr. Dole has served as a member of the Reading Development Panel for the National Assessment for Educational Progress. She was also a panel member of the RAND Reading Study Group on Reading Comprehension. She served on review panels for the Institute of Educational Sciences and the National Institute for Child and Human Development. And she was a member of the Committee on the Study of Teacher Preparation Programs in the United States, which was spearheaded by the National Research Council and of the National Academy of Sciences, and a National Reading First Consultant on Comprehension Instruction. In 1996, Dr. Dole began her current interest in school reform in reading and professional development in high-poverty schools. She co-authored Utah's Reading Excellence Act for the USDE and was project co-coordinator as well as state technical assistant for the grant from 1999 to 2001. Thereafter, along with two colleagues in special education at the University of Utah, Dr. Dole received the evaluation grant for Utah's Reading First. Her most recent research interests relate to the examination of the role of interest in struggling students' comprehension of complex text, as well as effective interventions of struggling adolescents. As you can tell, she comes to us with a wealth of background, experience, and knowledge in the areas of literacy interventions, and I'm pleased at this time to introduce to you Dr. Jan Dole. Dan, I want to make sure that you're unmuted because we can't hear you.
So today what we'll be talking about are 3 issues that are really critical for teachers and educators to know about. And the first one is we want to talk about and learn what the research says about the effectiveness of literacy interventions. We'll be talking a lot about the research. I'm not going to say research says that so-and-so, but really everything that I'm talking about today is based on a body of research, not one study, but really several studies. The next thing that we'll be talking about is we want to explore how teachers can offer literacy instruction that meet a range of student needs. I'm trying to get this there we go. Okay, explore how teachers can offer literacy instruction that meets lots of students' needs and not just one particular group of students. And then finally, what we'll be talking about is we want to discuss how school leaders, different school leaders, can support effective literacy programs. And so with that, I think I want to begin. And what we're going to start off doing is to talk about the different, why literacy matters. We'll talk about we'll give you some background so you can understand that, and then also talk about literacy and why we think it's important.
Jan, do you want me to? Okay, there you go. You're able to advance. I just wanted to check in.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some background. We know that literacy has the potential to meet students' most basic needs and to stimulate social, cultural, political, and economic participation among all citizens. We know that possessing knowledge, having access to resources so that we have a decent standard of living, and then participating in community life are just basic components of human development that everybody needs. We also know that literacy skills are really fundamental to informed decision-making, to personal empowerment, to active and passive participation in local and global social communities. We also know that in the National Assessment of Educational Progress in 2007 found that something like 69% of 8th graders fell below the proficient level in their ability to comprehend text at their grade level. And this is not new information, but it is not particularly encouraging information. We know that many students need help. We also know that 26% of students read below the basic level, which means that they don't have sufficient reading ability to understand and learn from the text that they read on their grade level. And then finally, we know that high school students with average reading abilities, many of these students are unprepared for the literacy demands that are going to take place when they go to college or in the workplace. So the need for improved literacy instruction of adolescents is really quite apparent. We know as well that literacy contributes a great deal to college and career readiness. In 2008, only 53% of the 1.4 million ACT-tested high school graduates were prepared for college-level reading. And this is a change. This wasn't true 20 years ago, but it certainly is true now. We also know that the percentage of ACT-tested high school graduates prepared for college-level reading was lower for certain demographic groups. And among those groups are males, African Americans, and our Hispanic students as well. We know that the ACT Explore test, curriculum-based assessment, focuses on English, math, reading, and science. It measures skills and knowledge needed for college success. But in 2008, we found that only 40% of the nation's 8th graders taking the Explore test were on target and prepared for college-level reading. And again, this has changed quite a bit. We know that one of the biggest shifts in instruction by the Common Core state standards is that literacy instruction occurs across all content areas. Literacy instruction is not something that just happens in the English language arts class. We know that informational texts are the majority of the reading required in college and the workplace. even though from the time students are in kindergarten, they mostly are exposed to narrative text and not informational text. And finally, we know through a more in-depth focus on literacy and science, history, and the technical subjects, students are going to be more equipped to enter college and the workplace with the skills that they really need in order to be successful. Let's look at literacy interventions for a minute. And when I say literacy interventions, I'm talking about what is specific to struggling readers, the kinds of things that we do specifically for struggling readers, more than instruction, for example, but really interventions. But struggling readers are not able to make improvements in their reading skills in normal classroom instructional conditions. So they typically cannot meet grade level standards in literacy throughout middle school and high school. This is a particular problem that our struggling readers have and that our teachers are experiencing on an everyday basis. We know that these students are at serious risk for being unable to use literacy skills successfully after they finish high school, when they go on either to college or other careers that they may be interested in. We know as well that intensive interventions focused on students' individual needs is going to improve their literacy skills substantially, and that's going to translate into gains in content area achievement. And then finally, we know that determining student skills and then helping them learn specific reading strategies and providing them with intensive and individualized instruction really does appear to be a promising method for improving the outcome of struggling readers. When we do these kinds of things, our struggling readers really can be successful. And so I want to stop right there before we begin the formal program. And Elizabeth, would you take it from here and ask questions of our audience, please?
Sure thing. So that was a really brief introduction and background into the research and what the research says about why literacy matters. I'm sure you're all here because you acknowledge that literacy matters for the students you work with. And so we're curious to find out among the group here, what evidence do you have that literacy interventions are necessary at your school or your district where you're working with students? So we're going to put up a poll. It's going to be open-ended, so you can type in your response, and we'll give you a few moments to formulate some thoughts there. While you're all writing, I'll remind you that the parking lot on the left is for questions or comments as we go through the presentation. If something that Jan says or talks about is interesting to you or you have a question about, feel free to post it in the parking lot, and she and I will be glancing at those and try to address as many questions as we can throughout. And here in the center is the poll that we're asking the current question, and so I see lots of responses coming in there. So a lot about data, different forms of data that are being collected at your schools are telling you that interventions are necessary. Jan, I know you're going to talk about assessment and different ways to determine how students are performing, kind of a teaser into a later section of the PowerPoint.
Yes, Elizabeth, and I'm really excited to see so many people talk about and mention data because it's a much more solid way of determining which students need help than just thinking about one's opinion. So the data are very important, and it's really exciting to see so many people using data in such a positive way.
And a wide variety, too. You know, I see a lot of different forms of assessment being mentioned here, you know, ranging from formative assessment to benchmarks, and of course, the different state level assessments, taking a look at your special populations and English learners and students with disabilities, these different groups I know you'll touch on a little bit too throughout the presentation.
We will. I'm going to do that, Elizabeth. You're right. And I actually like the fact that there's so many different ways of collecting data because there isn't one right way to do it. There are a lot of different kinds of evidence that you can use to show that really many students need more intervention than can be given in a typical classroom by a good, wonderful, solid teacher. There are just some students that need more help than that.
Wonderful. So I think that the responses here and the speed with which people were able to generate these ideas indicates that we know that students need some assistance with literacy. We're collecting the information, and now we need to know what to do about that. So we're going to move into the next part of the presentation where you're going to talk to us a little bit about how it breaks down at different grade levels in terms of the different types of instruction and intervention that can be delivered to students.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. And that's what I'm going to start to do now. One of the things that's really quite interesting, I find, is that we'll be talking about two things, both instruction and intervention. And really, in a way, we sort of weave or go from instruction to intervention, instruction being sort of your tier 1 basic instruction that teachers provide, moving to tier 2 and tier 3 interventions where students need more support, more help, more practice, let's say, to be able to accomplish the kinds of skills that we ask students to do. So right now I'm going to talk about the K-3 reading curriculum, which is intended for all students who are beginning readers, and those are students kindergarten, first grade, second grade, but as well as, and I think this is really important that we realize, as well as older students who read at the third grade level or lower. Okay, so components of the K-3 curriculum we want to look at very carefully. And we say, all right, we know that kindergarten, first and second graders, third graders as well need these component parts of the curriculum. But what about ninth and 10th graders? Well, most ninth and 10th graders don't need all the same components. But if a ninth grader is reading on a second grade level, then the K-3 curriculum is the appropriate curriculum to give to that particular student. I know here in Salt Lake City where I work, we have many refugee students coming in at the 9th or 10th grade level, and they're reading at a third grade level. Well, those students need that K-3 reading curriculum. Obviously, you're not going to do it with cartoons or whatever, but they still need that curriculum. So we know that the components of the K-3 curriculum should be tested on and taught to all students who are reading below a third grade level. We need to determine which skills the students have and then which skills the students are missing, and then teach the skills that are missing. So let's talk about this curriculum and what it looks like. Okay, so what should we be teaching? Well, phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, phonics, and that's decoding words including structural analysis, fluency, relating content to background knowledge, which is an important part of comprehension, applying comprehension strategies, and monitoring comprehension, and writing. Now, unfortunately, I think too long we've just focused on phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency at the K-3 level, but I think it's very clear from a lot of research that we need to be focusing on comprehension as well and writing as well, starting at the kindergarten level. So our instruction needs to be about all components of reading and not just those few components. But let's talk particularly about what those components are. Phonemic awareness is the awareness that text is made up of sentences and phrases and words that represent sounds. If we have the sentence, for example, the cat is on the couch, we say that sentence, the cat is on the couch, but it consists of 6 individual words, and that's phonological awareness. At a narrower level, we also understand the importance of phonemic awareness. And this, over the last 10 or 20 years, I think this is a huge improvement in our understanding of the reading process because students need to know that words are made up of individual sounds. And so you have a b and an o and an I and an n that makes up the word bling. We have sounds sh and the sound of I and the sound of p. and it makes the word ship. So that phonemic awareness, taking a word and breaking it up into its individual component sounds, is critically important. And games, I want to mention as well, games are the best way to teach these skills. When I've been in kindergarten classrooms and first grade classrooms, the high quality teachers that I've worked with, they play games with students, and that's how they work on these particular strategies. They don't use worksheets, they don't use workbooks. Kids can play lots of fun games that will teach them the things they need to know. When we look at phonics, for example, we're talking about the relationship between the letters and the sounds. Well, at a basic level, students need to know that letters represent sounds, and that's kind of your basic phonics knowledge. Let's see. They need to know how to segment and blend words together, and I think that those are the important skills, the huge important skills that students need to be able to do at the very early level. So you take the word sun and they can say, they can break it down, they can segment it. The word sun, it consists of s, and n, those sounds that make up sun. We can take the word men and it consists of an and an and an n that makes the word men. So you can take a word and break it down, or you can take the individual sounds and put them together and they make a word. And that's really critically important for students at the very beginning. And also older students who are just learning to read as well. And I love using manipulatives, using magnets, using whiteboards, and having students manipulate the letters and the sounds together. And in the very best primary grade classrooms that I've seen, this is how students spend their time. Again, they don't do workbooks and worksheets. They might do a few, but really they're using their hands, they're using their eyes, they're using their ears to manipulate sounds in language. As part of phonics, I do want to mention the importance of root words, because this is not something that I see enough teaching of, because root words are really critical to teach in the K-3 level. Root words pave the way for older students to learn how to break down multisyllabic words, and I'll talk about that shortly. But if you have the word unhelpful, for example, help is the root word. Rereading, read is the root word. Unforgiving, forgive is the root word. And we want to teach children at the very young ages, starting in first grade, to be able to recognize that root word, because it will help them and teach them something that they'll be able to use as they encounter more multisyllabic words in the older grades. And one of the things that I love to do is use whiteboards to teach root words and to have students write words down, etc. I want to move on to fluency. Fluency involves 3 components, and I think most of us know this, although the big thing that everybody talks about is fluency being equivalent to speed, and we know that it's not. Okay, we know that fluency involves accuracy. It does involve some speed because you can't be too slow, but it also involves expression as well. So all of our students have to focus on the 3 components and not just speed. And I think this is something that really we have a problem with when teachers focus so much on just read faster and faster without that important part of it. Not only needs to be fast, but it needs to be accurate, and you need to read with expression. So the goal for fluent oral reading is that it sounds like oral language. And we also know that, especially for younger kids, the use of repeating readings is very helpful. And I think a lot of reading programs do focus on the need for repeated readings and the use of repeated readings for students. It's a very good way to build fluency.
Dan, I'm going to jump in for
go
just
ahead, Elizabeth.
There's some good conversation happening in the parking lot, and one of the questions that's coming up and something people are mentioning is this oral language component of literacy. And you touched on that briefly there, but I wanted to have you speak to that and talk about the importance. And others are saying they value oral language and oral language development as a component of early literacy. Can you talk to us for a moment about that?
Yes, I certainly can, because you are all absolutely correct that oral reading is the foundation for written language, and it's the foundational skill that really allows children to build that written language knowledge. So oral language is critically important. I remember walking into a classroom, a kindergarten classroom, that a principal told me was a model classroom. And as I went into this classroom, no, it was a silent classroom. It's really quite interesting because it was silent. And I just thought about that in terms of the importance of oral language. We need kindergarten classes to be noisy. Kids should be talking and doing lots and lots of talking because it promotes that idea of oral language. This is particularly important, especially important with our English language learners who really need to do a lot of talking. So one of the things I recommend, and all of you know of this, is the whole idea of turning and talking. So instead of one person raising his or her hand and then the teacher asks that person a question, instead we say turn and talk. That way everybody gets to talk, everybody. And the more we can have children talking at those early stages and later stages as well, the better their vocabulary is going to be and the better their reading is going to be as well. So by not mentioning it, I don't want you to think that it's not important. We know that it's vitally important. All right, let me move on to vocabulary. And many of you know the three tiers that Isabel Beck talks about in terms of vocabulary, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And so I'll just kind of continue talking about the Tier 2 words, which we know absolutely need to be taught to children. Words like irritated, words like participate, words like sullen and silence. I remember I used to teach my third graders the word patience. And at first they didn't know what patience meant, but third graders need to know that they need patience with their teacher so that their teacher can get to all of them at one time. So just teaching those basic Tier 2 words that adults use on a regular basis is critically important for vocabulary. And it relates so much to oral language as well. It's learning those new words. And traditionally we haven't really focused on teaching the meanings of words to kindergarten, first, second, and third graders. We've usually waited till they're older, but we know now that we can't wait, and those need to be taught. We also know that we need to teach academic words that are key to the school tasks. This is especially important for English language learners, but it's important for all learners as well. One teacher told me about a student they had. They were working on a end of level test, end of year test actually, and it was a math problem, and the student didn't know the word omit, and so was not able to answer that question. And so academic words are critical as we look at the new Common Core standards. For those of you who are involved in the Common Core standards, academic words are huge. Knowing the difference between discuss and explain and describe are critical for our students to be able to perform the tasks that are expected of them. We also know that Tier 3 words need to be taught. We'll talk more about this at the middle and secondary level, but it's even true at the primary grade level. Tier 3 words that are specific to the discipline, need to be introduced to children and taught early on. And that's an important part of instruction. The other thing I want to focus on too is, and talk to you about, is the importance of role-playing, drawing, examples, non-examples, all these kinds of things in teaching vocabulary. Because what's happening is students need multiple examples of a given word. They need lots of opportunities to practice the word, and they need definitions that are not dictionary definitions, but are student-friendly definitions. And all this is consistent with Isabel Beck's work. And if you're not familiar with her work, I really encourage you to look at her work. Her name is spelled B-E-C-K. It's pretty easy to spell, and she talks a lot about the importance of student-friendly definitions and about repeated use of the words. One or two examples of words or use of words is really not going to make a difference in terms of students' vocabulary knowledge. Words have to be used lots and lots of times. Okay, and then the next thing that I want to talk about is in comprehension, because comprehension is really a huge issue when it comes to our K-3 level. One of the things that we want to teach, and this I would say is somewhat problematic in the sense that I wish that we would see more instruction on this, and that's metacognitive strategies, which actually we can teach students from very early on. And that's the whole idea of knowing whether the text is making sense or not. One of the things we know for our struggling readers is often kids don't know whether the text is making sense, or they keep reading even though it doesn't make sense. So metacognitive strategies are huge to teach in terms of reading comprehension, just helping students know whether they understand something or not. And when they don't understand, what do they do to fix it? So the fix-it strategies tell readers what to do when reading doesn't make any sense. That's one thing. Comprehension strategies, we're all aware of the importance of comprehension strategies. There is huge amounts of research supporting the use of comprehension strategies to build strategic readers, teaching them things like how to ask questions, how to summarize, how to visualize. There are a number of different comprehension strategies that can be taught. One of the things that, a question that one participant asked at one time was, what about when we ask students to look for evidence in a text? And one of the things, an important strategy I don't see very much information on, but is huge, is teaching students how to scan for information. When you're trying to look for a specific answer to a question, you can't start reading at the beginning. But what you have to do is scan for the particular word or words that will help you get the answer to your question. So scanning for information, I think, is a very underutilized skill that I would really like to see us pay more attention to. And then the importance as well in comprehension of using informational text just to build world knowledge. And those of you, again, who are involved in the Common Core standards are aware of the importance of informational text and the emphasis that now is being placed on informational text. And the emphasis is not to say that narrative text is not important. That's not the point. But that informational text builds a lot of the world knowledge that our students need to be able to get around in the world and also to be able to comprehend better as well. So that importance of informational text is huge. So when we look at effective interventions for the K-3 level, not instruction but interventions, what is it that we really want to see? Well, what we'd like to know, and this is sort of basic for all interventions, find out what students know through assessments. They really have to be assessed, not in any high-stakes way, not in any summative assessment way, but just looked at and assessed to figure out what is it that they know, because we want to know that, and that's important. And then second, we want to know what they don't know, okay? And then we teach them what they don't know through the interventions. We teach, and that teaching involves filling in those gaps at the K-3 reading level where students are missing certain skills. And that will do the most good for our students, not teaching them things they already know, not skipping things they don't know, but finding what is it they know, what is it they don't know, and then filling in those important gaps. And now I think I'll turn it over to Elizabeth again.
Great, Jan. Well, there was a lot of activity over there in the parking lot, like I mentioned before. I want to touch on a few things before I get into this question. One of the themes I'm seeing in the commentary from participants relates to parent involvement and the ability of families, parents, to support literacy, either remediation or support and encouragement in the home. And folks are sharing some of their experiences where that really is varied. Can you talk to us briefly about your insights maybe into how families can best support literacy at all levels? I think it's at the preschool before they enter K-12, but also throughout a child's K-12 experience. What is
Yes.
the role of parents, and how can we as educators best support that?
Yes, parents have a huge role, and we know from a lot of research that parents' expectations matter, and what parents do in the home relating to reading matters. High expectations are uh, maybe the primary important high expectations for their students. It's very, very important. They have to expect that their students are going to do well and share that information with students so students know they're expected to do well. They're expected to learn how to read and to read every day. And so there are a couple of things, of course, that people are most aware of, and these to me are the most important. One is reading aloud to students, and two is having students read every day. Read to parents, read to brothers, read to siblings, read to friends, etc. That time spent reading is time well spent. And it also evidences to children that the parents think reading is important. Children have to know that parents think reading is important. I'm not someone who thinks that parents need to intervene in their children's reading. A lot of time parents don't have the ability. They don't have the knowledge and the skills to intervene to help students. But what they can do is read to their children every day, make sure their children read, provide books, either by purchasing books or by going to the library. The library is a huge place for books to be available to students. And so my orientation towards parents and parents' help is in the high expectations, the reading aloud, and then working with students on reading in a generic sense rather than in a very specific sense.
Very good. I think that is really helpful, and it seems to align with some of the thoughts that folks have here in the parking lot. We would always like there to be more that parents can do, but I think that your take on it is realistic, and knowing what we can do in schools and in classrooms is really what we're here to talk mostly about today. So we're going to turn to this question on the screen, two questions actually, and we're interested in finding out from those of you in the audience, what are some of the effective literacy interventions you've seen at your school at K3, at the K3 level? I've seen some of these coming across in the parking lot, so if you could repost here so that we can have everything in one place and have a conversation around this, that would be super. We'll also post a second box that has the question about whether these interventions have involved vocabulary and comprehension, as well as phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency. So many of these components that Jan just addressed in the last section, thinking about how those are playing out in your schools and your classrooms. It would be great to share those experiences here. So we'll put up those two poll boxes. We'll give you a few minutes to generate some ideas there. While folks are doing that, Jan, there were some other questions that were coming in. One, I just want to acknowledge Jacob asked early on, when you were talking a bit about games and the use of manipulatives in a primary classroom as a way to reinforce content knowledge and the different literacy strategies that students are being exposed to. He was asking specifically about explicit instruction. Does this replace explicit instruction? And I know you're going to touch on that in a later slide, so just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, if I could just say something, it's interesting because we will talk about explicit instruction, but the games and the activities that students do don't replace explicit instruction. It's both. It's explicit instruction and the games and activities as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, that was my sense, in that you were going to describe that in more detail, so I wanted to make sure that we acknowledged that now.
Good.
And another question that came up in a couple different ways, I think Patrice was the first one who asked this, really kind of the big elephant in the room is how we have these large, high-stakes assessments, large-scale assessments at the state level, and we are asking students to be reading on grade level. They're being assessed on grade level, and we know a good majority of students are maybe not on grade level. So the question really is how do we work around this when the accountability measures have one expectation and we know that what you're describing, using interventions to hopefully bring students up to grade level, but when we know they're not there, you know, how do we balance this need to prepare for a large-scale assessment, but knowing that our students are not at the reading level that's needed for that assessment?
Yeah, that's a really important question. It's a great question, and I think it's a real conundrum for teachers. And the best way I can think to answer that question is we want to do both, okay? We want to have students be reading some text on grade level, even if they can't read at an independent or even instructional level on grade level. We still want them to be reading some text on grade level. Okay, so how do we do that? If they're reading 2 or 3 years below grade level, what do we do? Well, what we do is we provide more scaffolding and support for teachers for students so that they can be successful. Okay. At the same time, that doesn't mean that everything they read needs to be on grade level. We wouldn't want to do that because that's going to frustrate our struggling readers. So while some text that they read can be on grade level, we also want some text that they read to be on their instructional level, and then stuff that they read on their own can even be on their independent level as well. So I think there's a lot of confusion based on what started at the Common Core standards about kids should all be reading on their grade level. And there's a lot of confusion among teachers, and I totally understand it. But I think if we think about it in the sense of, okay, let's just have some instruction on grade level so that we challenge students some of the time, but not all of the time. So I think there's room for both.
That's very helpful, Jan. Thank you for that. Let's shift over here. There's quite a lot, and I'm trying to look through and see where the responses lie for the first question, thinking about effective literacy interventions that are used in K-3 classrooms. And I'm seeing quite a bit of reference to specific programs, Reading Recovery Foundations, or in Gillingham, some more general, using guided reading groups, oral reading, you know, small group instruction. Are there any things there that you see, Jan, that you want to jump on and have a more detailed discussion about?
Yeah, that's a good question, Elizabeth. No, there really isn't, because there are a number of programs that can be successful. It's not true that there's only one program that is going to work for all students. That just is not true. So the variety of things that I'm seeing here as I'm reading people's responses, if it works for a given group of students, if it works for a teacher, if it works for a school, then that's great. I will mention that What Works Clearinghouse, the government-sponsored What Works Clearinghouse, does have lists of lots of different reading programs and lists their effectiveness as shown by the research as well. And so I think that's really useful for teachers to look at, especially if they're using a program that they find is not effective. But many of the programs that I'm looking at and I'm reading that people say they're using have been shown to be effective in many circumstances.
Very good. And so when we go down to the second question, whether these interventions have really involved all components of literacy, we're seeing it kind of mixed. You know, they're targeting particular needs. Some programs are aimed at one need over another. I'm trying to just glance through here. Some are more holistic that really blend the skills. I think your suggestion about the What Works Clearinghouse and using that resource as a tool to determine which resources and which programs might be better suited for different kinds of student needs is a really great place for educators to start. Are you there, Jan?
Yes, I am, yes.
Great. Okay, so we're going to move these polls right out and get us into the next section. We're going to move into learning a little bit more about what we can do for students in grades 4 through 12.
Okay, good. So we've dealt with the K-3 curriculum, and we've also said that, gee, if students are in the 9th grade, 8th grade, and they're reading at a 3rd grade level, they need that curriculum as well. Well, now we're going to move on to grades 4 and 12, and I would say even 2nd graders reading at a 6th or 7th grade level need the curriculum for 4th through 12th grade as well. So we're really talking about the importance of looking at where our readers are, where their level is, rather than what their age is. So let's go to grades 4 through 12 and what should be taught. So, okay, word study, including structural analysis and root words. Not word study in terms of phonics, but word study in terms of figuring out multisyllabic words, because a lot of times that's where our struggling readers have problems. Struggling readers also have problems with fluency a lot of times, grades 4 through 12, and they're below grade level because their fluency is not up to snuff. It's not up to grade level. So the importance of speed, accuracy, and expression for the upper grades is important. Vocabulary continues to be important. Comprehension continues to be important. Writing becomes critically important at this level. And then as well, I do have to talk about motivation, because we know that as students get older and older, their interest and motivation for reading goes down and down and down. And that is really sad. But that's true not only in the United States, interestingly enough, but in other countries as well. So let's talk more specifically, for instance, start with word study. Older students generally are phonemically aware, and most of them know phonics pretty well. We shouldn't be spending time with older readers who are reading at a 4th grade level above on those things. However, they do need to know how to break down or decode multisyllabic words. They need to identify and break down words into syllables, into word parts, blend the word parts together, identify common prefixes and suffixes, understand Greek and Latin roots. These are all critically important at that older grade level. Some students figure it out on their own, and they don't really need extra help. But I'm actually surprised at how many normal level readers still need help with those basic multisyllabic words. And I also want to mention, too, even with older students, I like to use whiteboards with short lessons for students where they can practice multisyllabic words, breaking down the words, circling the root words, drawing lines or drawing a box around the prefix, a circle around the suffix, etc. So those are very useful activities to do with students because they're actually manipulating rather than just looking at the words. So fluency is important as well. We know that we need good models for fluent reading. I really think that we ought to continue reading aloud to students beyond the 4th grade. We shouldn't stop there. The use of repeated readings is important for students who really do lack fluency, and I think that's something that we ought to think about. For older grade levels, I think it's important to have students track their own gains over time. They can use charts or graphs to monitor their own progress, and they really like to see their progress over time. So I think that's important. With younger students and repeated readings, they don't necessarily need to track their progress. Sometimes it's helpful if they do. But I think for older kids, they need to see that, and that's an important part of their learning. Provide wide reading opportunities as well to develop fluent reading. And I think this is interesting because we don't normally associate wide reading opportunities with fluent reading. But the research shows that it works and that it's really important that we select interesting passages for students at their reading level and then have them practice that. And then we progressively provide them with more and more difficult passages. So wide reading opportunities, a lot of different topics, narrative and informational text. I think all those things are very helpful and important for our students. When it comes to vocabulary in the grades 4 through 12, it's critical. Explicit instruction on individual words is critical. And we can't do a lot of words that way, but we really need to be teaching individual words to students every day. Beck's Tier 2 words are important, especially for all students, actually. Words like inscribe and omit and option and synthesis. Beck's Tier 3 words for content area teachers especially, the importance of their teaching the words that are critical for their content area. These words are going to be used over and over again in the content areas. They need to start learning them at the K-3 level, and then they build that knowledge as they get older. Words like mitosis, words like reproduction, metaphase, chromosomes. There's lots of words within each content area that students need to know. Not just know the definition, but they really need to know the concept. What is the concept of mitosis? How does it work, etc. For students, even in the 12th grade, okay, student-friendly definitions, not dictionary definitions. As many of you know, the problem with dictionary definitions is that sometimes the word in the definition is just as hard as the original word. So student-friendly definitions, lots of examples, lots of non-examples, make concept maps and other graphic organizers, and multiple uses of a given word. Multiple meanings of words as well. This is especially important for our English language learners because they'll typically learn one meaning, but they don't know the multitude of other meanings that words have. So that's especially important. And for all our students, English language learners and others, the active engagement in word learning is so critical. We have to move beyond what many of us learned in school, which is write down the definition, write a sample sentence. We have to move beyond that so that we're actively engaging students because they really can learn words, but they really have to be working hard at it. They need to be writing, they need to be reading, they need to be seeing and listening to those words. As well with vocabulary, we also want to teach word learning strategies. And the term morphology comes up here. Many of you may know the term, but some of you may not. All morphology means is morphology is the smallest meaningful unit, the smallest meaningful units of words. For instance, take the word scribe. Okay, scribe is a morphological term, and it means to write, right? And so we can say inscription, prescription, subscription, description, and transcription. All of these words come from the word scribe. This is, again, really critically important for our English language learners because typically when you change a word from a verb to a noun, for example, it's difficult for students to figure out what the word is. But if they know the root word, and that's why I mentioned that at the K-3 level, if they know the root word, then they can circle the root word, and that can really be a key to helping them figure out what the word is and what it means. Okay, comprehension, and we know this is so important. The first thing I want to talk about in terms of comprehension is the importance of activating background knowledge that's important to the comprehension of a to-be-read selection. We know that background knowledge is probably the single most important component of comprehension. The more you know about a topic, the more you understand a text on that topic. There was some controversy about this when the Common Core Standards first came out in 2010 and 2011, but there's no controversy anymore. Background knowledge is critically important and needs to be activated to figure out what students already know about a topic that they're reading, and it needs to be built when students don't have any knowledge about a topic that they're reading about. When reading complex texts or articles or materials where students have no background knowledge at all, We want to build the background knowledge so that students will be able to understand the selection. It's very difficult, almost impossible, to read a piece and understand it if you have absolutely no background knowledge. And this is something I think teachers have done for years and years, but I have to mention it because we have so much research about it. At the same time, activating or building background knowledge should take 10 minutes or so. What we don't want to do is spend all the time on activating and building background knowledge and having no time for the kids to read. I once saw a class where a teacher spent 35 minutes activating and building background knowledge and then 10 minutes where the kids actually read. And that's kittywampus. We don't want it to be that way. So we really need to be spending the bulk of the time reading, but at the same time we do need to focus on background knowledge and make sure kids have the knowledge they need to be able to understand a text. Now, in addition to that, we want to teach students comprehension strategies. And there are so many comprehension strategies to teach. We don't have to teach them all. I think the important point about teaching comprehension strategies is to get kids to be active learners. If we use graphic organizers, they have to be active learners. If we teach them how to summarize, they have to be an active learner. If they're answering questions and looking for evidence, or even if they're developing questions, like asking questions, they still have to be active learners. So we want to make sure that we teach comprehension strategies. And again, I'm going to come back on this importance of explicit instruction, and I know several of you have mentioned it, but we want to use explicit instruction to teach those comprehension strategies. And then something that we don't do enough of is not to teach comprehension monitoring strategies, to teach students, even in the 9th grade, 10th grade, whatever, to be aware of when they're not understanding something and to be aware of when they are understanding. Struggling readers, unfortunately, are not aware of their comprehension. They think they understand when they really do not. Okay, and so we want to teach them to be aware of when they are and when they do understand and when they don't. And I think modeling is a great way to do this. What I have a lot of my graduate students tell me is when they go out to their classrooms, they take their text from the class that I have, and they show students how, I can read a text when I don't understand it. I don't understand what I'm reading. They think, students often think, if I don't understand it, I must be dumb. And that's not true, because everyone can come across a text that they don't understand. So being aware of whether you understand or not, and then monitoring that comprehension is important. Then the last thing I want to talk about related to our 4 through 12 curriculum is motivation. And I told you why, and there isn't anyone listening that doesn't know the fact that for middle and high school students, motivation is a problem. It's a problem for all of us. So what do we do about that? Well, number one, we can provide content goals for reading, and that's like a purpose for reading. We're not reading just because I said to read. We're reading because we're going to find out X. We're going to find out Y. Here's why we're reading. Increasing interest through background knowledge, helping students develop some background knowledge so they can, develop some kind of interest. That will help them with motivation. Providing stimulating tasks that can lead to research, where you can have a group of kids say, all right, I want to learn more about this. I want to research this. And so I'm going to do that through more reading. And then finally, asking students to develop their own content goals. That makes sense as well. Using interesting text. I think this is critical. I really do. Texts have to be interesting to students, and they need to appeal to the things that students are interested in, or there has to be some kind of connection. Texts that are visually appealing and readable, not encyclopedias, or even online encyclopedias are not necessarily any more interesting. Texts that are new, that are bright, shiny colored, that are relevant to students' lives. All these things help with motivation. And then a final thing that helps with motivation is to provide opportunities for collaboration. When students work together on something, a lot of times that develops their interest. So the more that students can work together, the better. And I appreciate many teachers who say, my students don't work well together. They get off task. They're not motivated. They want to work on something else and not what they're supposed to. And I appreciate that that's true, but it takes work on the part of the teacher to figure out ways that kids can collaborate and be accountable, that their tasks that they have to do are things that they have to produce, and they have to produce it within a certain amount of time. So there are strategies, I believe, that teachers can use so that the collaboration works instead of having students get off task. So I'm going to stop there. And Elizabeth, would you want to ask some more questions?
Sure thing. I know this topic of motivation is something people are interested in and in tune to, because I'm seeing some of that related commentary in the parking lot. So I do want to open up that question in just a moment to hear from you all about maybe some of your insights into why your students might be unmotivated or uninterested in reading, maybe your students or maybe your own children. And then the second part of the question, thinking about how teachers have been effective in motivating students. So we heard Jan describe some of the ways that she suggests, but let's talk from your experience. We're going to open up those two polls. I'll get those on the screen, and while you're all getting some ideas together there, I want to turn again. There's some questions that came up. I want to actually scroll back. Jan, if you have a chance and you can look in the parking lot, Aracelia asked a question a while back, but I wanted to make sure to touch on it. She's curious about when you were talking about word study, I think, talking about blending and different aspects of reaching students at that level. She's wondering, how can a teacher move students from Tier 3 to reading simple text, and how to make that jump, and what would be a realistic expectation on the teacher's part of what the student should and could do?
You know, I don't have that just up yet. So tell me a little bit more, Elizabeth, and maybe I can understand it better and help.
I'm trying to get back to the question myself. And
yeah.
Maybe if Aracelia can retype it, that would be great. Oh, wait, here it is. I'm struggling with the how. This is, I think, right after you were talking about morphology. So okay. I'm struggling with the how. How do I assist students in Tier 3 to move from segmenting and blending to reading simple text? What is the expectation?
Oh, good. Okay, good. Yeah, I think this kind of gets what we want to do, first of all, is give kids simple words, maybe 3 or 4 simple words, and then teach them a couple of sight words. Okay. Now you can't really move them from blending, segmenting and blending to real text without sight words. Okay. So you can have cat, for instance. The cat sat down. Okay. Well, let's see. The cat sat on the hat. All right. Let's do the cat sat on the hat. So you can work with cat, you can work with sat, and you can work with hat. But you also have those sight words, the cat sat on the mat. And so you teach a couple of sight words, okay, and then you take the words that you've blended together and you put them together in a sentence, and then you have students start reading the whole sentence. Okay, so that's the way it works because you've got to choose the words carefully that they can segment and blend so that they can make a sentence out of it. And then you have to add the few sight words that they need to be able to make a coherent sentence. that's a critical stage for kids. It's one thing to be able to segment and blend individual words, but it's something else to put them together to make a sentence, and you can't do it without sight words. So I hope that helps.
Great. Hopefully that does help Aracelia with her question. Another one that came from Ashley, and I think some others were kind of adding on to this question. The question is, how, and you mentioned this, how do we teach students to understand when they think they do but they really don't? And the piggyback to that was talking a little bit about self-monitoring skills and how to teach those skills to students and then encourage their use. So could you talk to us a little more about that?
Yes, okay, good. So I think one of the things that a teacher has to do is model when she or he is reading a text and it doesn't make sense. I think you have to model that with kids and say, okay, it doesn't make sense. Now, how do you know it doesn't make sense? And I saw someone write in the answers here the strategy of say something. Like say in a sentence or two, say it in your own words, okay? And so if you can't say it in your own words, then you don't understand it. And so I think you can teach kids that. And so you model that. You say, okay, so I'm reading this, and then you read it, and you say, can I summarize, or can I say this in a sentence or two? What are they really saying here? And then you might pause and you say, you know what? I don't really know. I can't say it. And if you can't say it, then you don't understand. So you model that for kids, and then you have them do it. And so they can do it by starting in very small segments, like maybe 2 sentences or 3 sentences for younger kids, maybe 4 or 5 for older kids. Can they say it in their own words? And if they can't say it in their own words, that's the clue that they need to know that they don't understand it. So I think that's the way it works very effectively. And I've done it with kids actually, and got them to be able to paraphrase in that way.
Great, thank you. And Amy offers a suggestion here. I think she's sharing one of the strategies she uses, and that really falls in line with what you were just talking about, Jan.
Right.
I'm going to turn to the first question. You know, what are the common reasons students may be unmotivated or uninterested in reading? And to be honest, these responses are really pulling at my heartstrings, because the ones related to students might be hungry, the home life, all of these basic needs that students have that aren't being met. Well, of course, those are really important and valid reasons for them to potentially be unmotivated or uninterested in reading. And, you know, going back to this conversation earlier about parents and family involvement, we as teachers and educators can't always correct all of those things. And that's really tough, because how do we embrace the students who are coming into our classrooms and meet them where they are? And so some of this is really, it's a challenge to think about really everything that the students are bringing into our classrooms. So that said, Jan, I don't know if you want to take a look at some of the responses here and think about how they resonate with your experiences.
Yeah,
you know,
the responses are wonderful. They really are. And the parking lot, all the comments in the parking lot are fabulous too, because I see the comments in the parking lot where our participants are naming lots of different wonderful ways and wonderful things that they do, wonderful programs, wonderful strategies that they use that take what I'm saying far beyond what I have time to say. And so I really want you to know that I appreciate it. As far as the motivation goes, I think it's really critical to understand that we look at Maslow's levels of needs. We know that if kids are hungry, if they don't have basic shelter, if they don't have some of these basic things that are necessary for their life, they're not going to be motivated to read. That's just the way it is. And it's very difficult for teachers. And I certainly have tremendous amount of empathy and sympathy as well for teachers who struggle with their students who struggle. So there are so many reasons why kids are unmotivated to read, from the beginning, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but also to lacking confidence, not being able to do it, not having supportive parents, etc. So it's a very complicated and complex issue.
It sure is. So turning a little bit to the solutions and the ways that teachers are effectively motivating students, there's some really wonderful ideas here. One that you, I think, already mentioned, and one that I did in my first grade classroom many years ago, was to role play and have students act out stories. And that was always a really fun way for students to build their comprehension and understanding, something my own children really like to do now. Lots of other great ideas here. Some getting into some of the ways that teachers can formatively assess their students. I'm seeing some teacher conferencing, helping students check their own understanding, different ways of getting insight into students' interests and making sure that there are texts and different types of literature available for students that speak to their interest areas. Really neat stuff here. Some use of technology, and I know, Jan, you're not going to really get into that too much, but if folks have suggestions there to share, it would be great for others to see what you're doing in your classrooms with the use of technology.
Yeah, I would be interested in effective technology methods for working with students. Certainly, there are some technology programs and whatever that really motivate students in ways that other things won't, and that's really useful. But I really don't know of particular programs, so any help in that way would be very helpful for everyone. And
positive reinforcement, praise, I mean, I don't want to understate that, because some people are saying that here, and celebrating reading goals that are achieved and different ways of acknowledging the successes students are having. And we don't want to lose sight of those little milestones being reached.
Right.
Okay, well, let's move on into the next section. We're going to get into the component of instructional delivery, and this is when we're finally going to talk a little more explicitly about explicit instruction. So I'll move you right into there.
Okay, good. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so when we look at different types of instruction, we can talk about whole language instruction, but really the research on whole language instruction really demonstrates for students who struggle especially, whole language instruction is just not that helpful, because they need the explicitness that doesn't come with whole language. Whole language instruction does work for some children effectively, but particularly for students who struggle, not particularly effective. Phonics-based literacy, phonics needs to be taught to all beginning readers, but after students are reading above the third grade level, it's really not that useful. So while phonics instruction is really important if we're looking at K-3 reading, above that, it's really not important. Once kids they've mastered phonics, they don't really need any more work on it. Okay, and then finally, another type of instruction that people often talk about is balanced literacy, which a lot of times I've seen balanced literacy being used as a proxy for whole language instruction. The idea, the theory of balanced literacy is really what is something that we want all, we expect, and we would like all of our educators to to embrace, because we want a balance between phonics-based instruction and specific skill instruction, explicit instruction, but also all those good things that students get from doing lots of reading, doing lots of writing. We'll talk more about this in a minute. So, okay, so in instructional delivery, the importance of explicit instruction, and several people have mentioned explicit instruction, and I didn't want you to think that I wasn't going to talk about it, because to me, the explicit instruction is really foundational for all our students who struggle. And that explicit instruction includes introduction, demonstration, guided practice, and independent practice, and I want to talk specifically about that. Okay, the introduction. We tell students, here's what we're going to be learning today. Here's why we're going to be learning this, and here's how it's going to help you when you read or when you write. Those kinds of things have been shown by research. It isn't somebody's good idea that, oh, we really ought to tell them what they're doing and why they're doing it, but rather research suggests that when we do that, especially for our older readers, but it's true for younger readers too, when we do that, kids learn more and they learn better. Demonstration, modeling, explanation. Let me show you how I do it. That's where modeling comes in. Let me think aloud about how I figure out what this word means. Think alouds are very important. Let me show you or tell you how this works. So that's also very important. Guided practice with feedback. And I see this as a progressive stage, not a one-step model or one-step stage, but many steps. Teachers and students together go through an example as a group. Okay? The teacher may need to go back and model or conduct another think aloud. Okay? After the teacher and students work together, then students work together in small groups of 4, let's say. Then students work together on another example in small group in pairs. And then finally, after students have done that and they have demonstrated to the teacher that they really do get it, that they understand it, then they work independently, and then we have independent practice. So that's a multi-stage model as opposed to a one-step model. So what are some other effective instructional techniques other than or as part of explicit instruction? Model, model, model. We can't model enough. It's very important to do that. Think alouds are very useful, but we want to make them short. Start with the concrete and move to the abstract. This is something we learn in Ed Psych 101 that I think we never can get tired of because it's always true. Don't assume transfer. You have to teach for transfer. This is something I think all of us, every single one of us as a teacher does at one point or another. We assume the kids can transfer from one example to another example, and they can't necessarily do that. So all the research points to the fact that you have to teach for transfer. Use multisensory experiences, even for older students. Hands-on practice. Eyes on practice, ears listening. Even when we take a word like mitosis, and we're trying to teach students what the word mitosis means, we want to write the word mitosis on the board. We want to say to students, okay, take out your whiteboards, write the word mitosis, write the definition of what mitosis means. So we want to constantly be using these multisensory experiences. That's how we all learn. Use writing to support reading and thinking. And again, I like the whiteboards, although there are lots of ways that you can write, just to practice. And keep expectations high. Always keep expectations high. And we know this, we need to make sure that we do it. Lots of reading, lots of writing. Reading not only during the instructional time, but reading other times as well, writing other times as well. Graphic organizers. I like graphic organizers because students can see something visually, and for many learners it's very helpful. There are some learners where graphic organizers don't help them at all, but some students do. So you want to use graphic organizers. It helps some students gain knowledge and learning. Lots of writing to support ideas from reading, and I think the Common Core state standards really emphasizes the importance of writing in response to reading. Lots of talk. We talked about oral language at the K-3 level. Lots of talk. Lots of group work, including collaborations of 4 and 3 and 2. And for those teachers who say, I can't have my students collaborate because they don't work well together, then my response is we know from research, we know that collaboration really does work and that kids learn from each other. And so I would say, let's find ways to make it work. And I think that it can be done. And so then I want to move back to you, Elizabeth, and you want to ask another question.
Sure. I think it would be great now to open it up again to talk with you all about what do you see and hear in classrooms where explicit instruction is taking place. So some concrete examples of that. We'll put up that question and allow you to start posting your responses. I see modeling is happening in classrooms, monitoring student engagement, think alouds. I like what you said about think alouds, Dan, and making sure they're brief and on target. And then I think the follow-up from that is thinking about how the transfer piece, which you also mentioned, how are students able to understand what the teacher is modeling in a think aloud and how they can then internalize that and utilize that to transfer to their own reading. That's probably a more difficult task in getting students to do that. See the gradual release of responsibility, the I do, you do, we do, lots of different ideas here.
Yeah, I think these ideas are excellent. They really are. And I'm really pleased to see that so many educators know about explicit instruction and know what the components are. The gradual release of responsibility, so Tammy put a name onto what I was talking about in terms of the guided practice with feedback. So I like that.
Wonderful. We'll give folks just another minute or so to type in responses. To answer a question that was asked earlier in terms of the transcript for these polls, we will make those available. I think one of my colleagues might have mentioned this in one of the boxes, but all of the archive materials from the event will be available in just a few days. You should receive an email because you've attended today's event that links you to those materials, and included there will be a transcript of these conversations. And so you don't have to worry about trying to capture everything at this moment. If there's something you want to get back to and an idea that you saw, or many ideas hopefully that you see, you can refer back to that in just a few days when we post that. Okay, we're going to pull that poll off the screen, and Jan, I'll have you move us into addressing the needs of all learners through the use of literacy.
Okay, good. Now, this is, I think, this whole area is something I think many people have questions with, and so I'm going to look forward to your help, Elizabeth, in answering questions that may come up. Let's talk first about students with disabilities. Students with disabilities and learning difficulties have problems in any of these areas, just like students without disabilities do. They can have problems in phonemic awareness, they can have problems in phonics, fluency, oral language, etc. And really, Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction is often needed, okay? And let me talk a little bit about that. Tier 2 intervention is needed. It's designed to provide more instruction and practice in skills that are just taught. So if a teacher is working with a group and that particular group, and out of a group of, say, 5 students, there are 2 that don't get it, that really are having problems, the teacher can pull those 2 and give those 2 more help with that particular skill or strategy that they're having problems with. And I see that as something that's comparable to Tier 2 intervention. It happens just in time, not 2 or 3 weeks after the skill's been taught, but just in time. And it's just more practice, more instruction with the teacher. Tier 3 is a different issue completely. Tier 3 is used when students really need intensive support and additional help because they're not succeeding with Tier 2 intervention. So they've had Tier 1 instruction, then they've had Tier 2 instruction, they've had more practice and instruction, but they're still not getting it. It's at that point that we would say, okay, we want to use Tier 3 intervention, okay? It upsets me when I hear Tier 3 intervention being special ed. Okay, we really can't look at it like, oh, Tier 3 intervention is just special ed. It isn't just special ed. It really has to be a part of a 3-tiered process of instruction and that moves into intervention when students need extra help. I want to talk about access for our English language learners because we know that English language instruction needs to provide language and literacy-rich school environments where kids are free to talk a lot and to make mistakes and have it okay to make mistakes. This instruction provides foundational skills for English language learners in the area of English, opportunities for lots of talk and interaction, the development of communicative strengths so kids feel like they can talk and they can get practice talking and it's okay. They need ongoing assessment and feedback to guide their learning. For instance, if they say a sentence and they say a partial sentence, the teacher repeats it, only in a full English sentence, and then the student repeats it as well. So that ongoing assessment and feedback to kids really helps improve their learning. And then proficient language modeling and support, where the teacher is providing a model for good coherent sentences, for example, and can have students work with those models. For our literacy instruction for English language learners, what is it that they need? Well, gosh, they need early, explicit, and intensive instruction in phonological awareness and phonics. Okay, they may need more intensive instruction than other students do because they're learning English as a second language. They need significant opportunities to develop the vocabulary knowledge that they need to. And here we're talking about Tier 1 vocabulary and not just Tier 2 and Tier 3. With most students, Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction is necessary, but Beck talks about Tier 1 instruction is not necessary because kids already have that knowledge. But our English language learners don't have the knowledge. They may not know, for example, how you say pencil in English. They may know it in Spanish, but or another language, but they may not know it in English. So they need opportunities to develop that vocabulary knowledge at the Tier 1 level as well as Tier 2 and Tier 3. They need opportunities to engage in structured academic talk that teachers can help them with. They need independent reading that is structured and purposeful with a good reader-text match, and we talked about that. They don't always need complex text. We don't always want to give them complex text that's too hard to read. They need to read independently at a level that's good for them. And lastly, they need strategies and knowledge to comprehend and analyze the challenging text, both narrative and expository, that we give our students who are non-English language learners, they're native language learners. Okay? So I want to talk about that specifically. And then the very last issue that I want to address is the role and your role, whatever that role may be, and effective literacy intervention programs. And the your really is quite different for all of you, and I understand that. But let me talk a little bit about different roles. The reading specialist role, when the reading specialist is the instructional leader of the school program. Sometimes the principal is the instructional leader. Sometimes the reading specialist can be, a reading coach can be the instructional leader, whoever that instructional leader is. What is their role? Number one, their role is as a leader in Tier 1 instruction. They would ask questions like, are all teachers using effective research-based practices for Tier 1 instruction? Is there consistency in the materials, the scope and sequence, the Common Core standards or other standards set by the state? Is there appropriate time on task? Does content area instruction include vocabulary and comprehension strategies? These would be all the kinds of questions that a leader in Tier 1 instruction would ask. Okay. The leader in Tier 1 instruction also has the responsibility of the organization and leadership of Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. There needs to be collaboration among all the people who instruct at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Classroom teachers need to work together. They need to work with special ed teachers. They need to work with the reading specialists. That collaboration ensures consistency between the different levels of instruction. I once had a teacher who works on Tier 3 interventions, and I asked her, so how is what you're doing in Tier 3 similar to what the classroom teacher is doing? And she responded to me, well, I don't know what the classroom teacher is doing. And that's not something that is really helpful for our students. Our students need that sort of consistency across Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So the collaboration is hugely important. The organization and management of paraprofessionals in an intervention program. Some teachers don't want paraprofessionals because paraprofessionals take work, and it's true, they do. And the organization and management and how they work is really part of the instructional leader's role. As well, the organization and management of successful parts of the literacy interventions. For instance, at the K and 1 level, we want early identification of students who need interventions. And I really love Joe Torgenson's, he has this phrase, catch them before they fall. And I think this is so representative of what we want our teachers to do at the K and 1 level. We need to catch our students before they fall, not after they've already fallen down, but catch them before they fall. We need to pay attention to the frequency of intervention sessions. At a 9th and 10th grade level, I worked with a school recently, and they wanted to have an intervention session after school 2 days a week. And my comment was, no, it can't be 2 days a week. That's not enough. It's got to be 4 days a week, and that's based on research. Okay? The group size, you should have a size of 1-to-1. That can work 1 to 2 and 3. I'm not sure. But my guess is, especially at the middle and secondary level, when we have group sizes of 1 to 20, so there's 20 struggling readers and 1 teacher, I'm not sure we have research to suggest that that is an effective way to intervene for our most needy students. We also know that the interventions that we have, successful intervention programs, do not take the place of regular classroom instruction. Rather, they're before school, they're after school, they're at different times. So what we're talking about really is doubling or tripling the dosage of intervention or instruction, not in place of, but in addition to. And we know this is a very effective way of improving students' achievement. And then, this is a real issue for so many of you, attention to assessment to inform instruction at the Tier 1 and Tier 2 and 3 interventions. And I think this is really especially important and timely because of the White House's suggestion that perhaps this country is testing too much. And while I think this is highly controversial, we've got lots of people saying there's too much testing going on. The kind of testing that we're talking about here is not the kind of testing that's high stakes. It's low stakes. But what we want to do, and I think this is especially true of at the middle and secondary level, we need to screen for students who are at risk. There are students who are at the middle and secondary level who seriously are at risk for reading problems and therefore for content area learning. They need to be screened. It doesn't take very much time to do it, but once the screening takes place, then we know these are the students we have to watch out for. Once we know that, we need diagnostic testing to figure out what are the skills and strategies that these at-risk students do have, and what are the skills and strategies that they don't have. And then we teach the ones that they don't have, and we monitor their progress over time. And we can do that with, I think, very effectively with CBM or AIMS. I know they're used in a lot of middle and high school, at a lot of middle and high school level. Teachers use DIBELS as well at the elementary level. It's highly controversial. There are lots of people that don't like these particular programs, but when used appropriately and when used well, they work. And I think that's the thing that we need to pay attention to. They have to be used appropriately. And then summative assessment of the identified students to see how are they doing at the end of the school year. Have we achieved what we want to achieve? So I think the whole issue of assessment it's so controversial. I think in general it is true that there's just too much testing, but I think what we need to do as teachers and as educators is to go back and look what is being tested and why is it being tested. And I think, and this is true for policymakers, for district principals, superintendents, et cetera, a real careful look at what is being tested and why is it being tested. Going back to those sort of basic questions can help get us the testing that's right for our kids. We don't want to test them too much, but on the other hand, without any testing at all, without any data collection at all, we really don't know where our kids are. So there has to be some middle ground, and I think that's really important. Let's talk about teachers. What's the teacher's role at the K-3 level? Well, okay, the teacher's role, implement research-based Tier 1 practices. And all those Tier 1 practices that are research-based, I've talked about earlier in our webinar, and so I think that those are the important ones to really hit. Work hard to catch students before they fall. We don't want them failing and then realizing it too late. See all students as their responsibility, not just students in their individual classrooms. This is one of the things that makes Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 instruction difficult. We have to move from an idea that the only kids that matter to me are the kids who are sitting in my classroom to the kids that matter to me are all the kids in the school, everyone. And so for our students who are at risk, it's all of them that we're concerned about and we want to help. We collaborate with other teachers to learn about the needs of the students and determine the best and most effective instruction for them, and then we monitor and track progress. I think those elements are absolutely critical for teachers. Now, for at the secondary level, we have a difference here because at the secondary level, for content area teachers, we want them to implement research-based Tier 1 practices in their own classrooms. Now, that does not include things like teaching students phonics or something like that, but it does include teaching students vocabulary that's important in their content areas, teaching students different comprehension strategies to understand their textbooks, and it also includes helping them decode those multisyllabic words that they have a hard time with. Second, have constant communication with other teachers and the reading specialists to identify students who struggle. You do want to check and make sure that those kids that are at risk are being helped. And then collaborate to learn about the needs of individual students who struggle and determine what's the best and most effective instruction and intervention for those students. A lot of times at the middle and secondary level, what we have are wonderful reading classes, remedial reading classes. The old term is remedial reading. We call them reading development classes now. Those classes are really critical for our students who struggle at the middle and secondary level. What's critical for principals? Let's talk about principals. The principals serve as support leaders who provide the leadership for effective interventions to happen. I think that's critically important. They identify themselves or someone else, for instance, the reading specialist, to be the instructional leader in the school. Someone has to be the instructional leader in the school. Sometimes principals can do it, but I don't believe they have to do it. They can also assign someone who is a master teacher, who is the reading specialist, the reading coach, etc. Support the instructional leader in every single way, and that means resources, all the different things that that the instructional leader needs to get teachers the support that they need to be able to give the instruction that they need. Provide financial support, other resources to figure out who are the students who struggle, okay, and what are we going to do about those struggling readers, and then to put effective Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions in place. So the principal's role is a huge role. It's very important, and I have never seen an effective intervention work with principals who are not on board. They absolutely have to be on board, and there are a lot of very important things that they can do. What about the district leader? What about district leaders in general in the district? Well, provide guidance and support to principals and instructional leaders. I think that's very, very critical. They need support from the top level down. Provide professional development to principals, instructional leaders, and teachers. After the Great Recession of 2008 to 2010, professional development has just, in many, many states, has just kind of died. And I think it's coming back, but probably not fast enough. Professional development is critical for all educators if they want to keep up and improve on what they know. We are constant learners, and we need to keep learning what works best. Provide financial support. District levels provide financial support to principals and to the instructional leaders as needed. Sometimes it's needed, sometimes it's not. And present a consistent vision of where the district is going and how it's going to get there. And I say this, and I think it's really, really important because I've seen many teachers talk to me about this and say, I don't know what our district expects out of us. I don't know where we're going and how we're supposed to get there. And unless teachers know that, then it's very difficult for school reform to take place. And then lastly, I really love this one, focus on what's important. And district leaders can do that. Reading and writing are critical. If students can't read and write, they are not going to be successful in middle school and high school. They're not going to be successful in college. They're not going to be successful in the career that they have. So focusing on what's important, I think, is a critical part. And then policymakers. What's critical for policymakers to do? Well, and I've worked with a lot of policymakers at the state office, at my state office of education, but also nationally as well. And I think one of the things that policymakers need to do is listen to all sides of the debate about educational issues rather than listening to just one side. There are several sides to a story, and all those sides need to be known to policymakers before they make decisions. Be apprised of the latest research, which policymakers can use as one important guide for effective educational policies. I'm dismayed when I hear policymakers talk about their neighbor who lives next door, or their niece or their nephew that has a problem, and then that particular problem becomes a focus of policymakers' policymaking. It needs to be, the policymaking needs to be based on research. It really does. Maybe it's not the only factor because there are financial issues as well, but it needs to be a very important one, and it needs to be on the top. Do not sway with the latest wind, but make rational decisions and set rational policy based on research-based information. And the swaying with the wind is something that we have, a problem that we have as educators, and we've had this for a long, long time. It isn't clear to me that we're beyond that, but we really need to focus on research-based best practices and not swaying with the latest wind. And then, and as part of that, don't establish policy for districts based on the latest trend or the cheapest, quote, fix. And I have an example of that where I know one particular group of policymakers had a chance to provide a very good technology writing curriculum for students. But instead of that writing curriculum, they found a cheaper one. It was cheaper, it's true. Excuse me for a sec. It's cheaper, it was true, but the problem is teachers didn't like it, teachers didn't use it, and now it's kind of on the shelf, and nobody's using it. Lastly, what's the role of higher education and teacher preparation programs? What's critical for teacher preparation providers to do? Well, number one, ensure that teacher educators know and teach students the state standards, whatever they may be, whether it's the Common Core or whether there are other standards. That's an important job of teacher preparation programs. Second, ensure that teacher educators know and understand local district and school priorities. Assist local districts and schools in professional development. There has to be a strong collaboration between teacher educators and the community itself, and the local districts and the local schools. If there isn't that collaboration, then sometimes teacher educators don't know what's important according to the schools, and that's a problem. And then finally, ensure that the teacher preparation curriculum and instruction is aligned with current state and national standards as well. And some of those things, I think, get left out in traditional teacher preparation programs. Certainly in some of the places that I've worked, they're less than important, and they really need to be very, very important. They need to be at the center of what teacher preparation programs present. So now, let me give you just kind of a synthesis of what we've been talking about. So research has established many particulars about what to teach to improve literacy achievement, and also how to teach it effectively. Everything that I presented to you today is based on research. There are very few things that I've said in this whole presentation that are not based on a body of research, not just one person's study, but really a body of research, and I think that's critical to understand. Teachers can offer high-quality literacy instruction that meets a range of students' needs. It really is possible to do, and there are many teachers now that are doing it quite effectively. And then finally, school leaders can support effective literacy program in several different ways, and I think those ways are really critical for educators to be aware of. Okay, Elizabeth, I'm going to pass this back to you.
Wonderful. Well, a lot of information you shared in that last segment and in the last 2 hours, and it's been really helpful to hear all of your suggestions and to know that just about everything that you've shared with us today is research-based. I like how you kind of ended with that because I think it's an important point. There's a few things we have left to do in the last 10 minutes. And I know that people are exchanging a lot of ideas in the parking lot. One question that just came up is whether that would be made available. Like I said earlier, from the polls, all of the transcripts of those will be available, and we will make the parking lot comments available. In just a few days, you all should receive an email that indicates that those materials are ready. So if you weren't able to grab all of those wonderful resources that your colleagues are sharing, you'll get that in just a few days. And now we want to turn to some takeaways. One of our goals is to ensure that you all have some tools and some resources to walk away from our events with and to improve your practice in whatever roles you might be serving in. So we'd like to hear about that. The sharing of ideas is really helpful to others as they decide how to take action in their different roles. So we're going to put up 2 different questions. One is, what are your key takeaways from today's presentation? What really resonated with you that you heard? And number 2, as a result of today's webinar, what action steps do you plan to take? How do you plan to use this information? So we'll put those up. We'll give you a few moments to respond to those 2 questions. If you do have any lingering questions, please put those in the parking lot. We have just a few minutes where we can address some of those. I think as we've gone through, I hope we've gotten to most of them. I've tried to capture those that I've seen, and we did receive quite a few in advance of today's webinar, and I think we touched on almost all of those. Looks like explicit instruction really hit home with a few folks.
Yes, all these comments, Elizabeth, are just great. They really are.
I think reinforcement and affirmation is always nice when folks say that. You know, they're coming to these sessions and finding that, oh, I am doing a lot of the right things. So knowing that you've given the stamp of approval to some of the strategies, I think, is really helpful for folks.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's good to know that what you're doing is the right thing to be doing. I also want to mention, too, that it's been hard for me as I'm going through this to read all the comments in the parking lot, but I just noticed there are wonderful complements and supplements to what I've been talking about, examples and resources in the parking lot, and I know I am personally going to look at the parking lot after we're done so I can get some of these resources because they're excellent.
And it's a good time to mention, I'll put up a slide in just a moment, if you all have specific questions for Dr. Dole beyond what we can address today, we'll be putting up her email address and you can feel free to reach out to her. I know, Jan, you'd be willing to respond to folks if they have questions after today's session.
Yes, I am, and Elizabeth, I'm really good at answering email, too. So really, if anyone has a question or you want to just comment or make comments about the session or ideas in the session, please email me, and I will get back to you soon.
Wonderful, wonderful. Just going to try to grab a few other ideas here. Looks like folks are interested in taking away some of the resources, sharing this information with colleagues. We always encourage that. You can see the archive of this event, like I said, in a few days. Feel free also to look at some of our past events. Touch not directly on literacy, but we had one recently on the importance of family involvement. We did one on differentiation with Carol Tomlinson. So you'll find a lot of resources. If you haven't been a regular attendee to our webinars, you'll find that our past events from the last 3 years, we've been doing this series, you can find a wealth of resources on topics that might pertain to you. So we're going to, I see people are still typing. I'm going to leave this up for just about another 30 seconds. And then I'm going to move us along into just some of our final housekeeping slides. There is the contact information that I referenced. If you have questions specific to this topic, please reach out to Dr. Dole. If you have general questions about the series or any of the work that the Rel Mid-Atlantic is doing, you can contact me or you can contact our general Rel Mid-Atlantic email. We do hope you'll come back for our next session, which will be in just a few weeks, and we'll be addressing effective instruction for English learners. So we'll get more into some specifics of how to support this particular population, which I'm sure pertains to many of you in this audience today. And because we value your input, we want to make sure that this is a series that speaks to your needs. We touch on topics that are of interest to you. Please do take a few minutes to respond to our feedback survey. You can submit your responses there, and we read those. We take those very seriously and want to make this the best series for you all. So at this time, I'd like to give a virtual round of applause to Dr. Jan Dole. It's been a wonderful 2 hours together learning more about literacy interventions, and I know it was exciting for me to learn a lot of new things, and I hope that you all will agree. Thank you very much, Jan.
And thank you very much, Elizabeth, and to all of you who interacted with us. Thank you for your thoughts and ideas, and I wish you the best.
We hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you.